I overheard my wife mock me as a provider but terrible lover, so I quietly rebuilt myself, took back power, and walked away to reclaim my life fully. The office set up in the spare bedroom allowed me to focus while maintaining the boundary between work and home life. That day, I finished my meetings early and decided to surprise my wife by helping with dinner. As I approached our bedroom door, I heard her laughing with that specific tone she used when gossiping with friends. Through the partially open door, I could see her on a video call, wine glass in hand, surrounded by 3 of her closest friends on the screen. I was about to announce my presence when her words froze me in place. "Oh God, you have no idea. Great provider, terrible lover," she declared with theatrical emphasis, prompting uproarious laughter from her friends. "I mean, he makes sure the bills are paid and I can shop whenever I want. But in the bedroom, total disappointment." The wine in her glass sloshed as she gestured dramatically. 10 years of marriage and I've faked it more times than I can count. Sometimes I wonder if he even notices how bored I am. Her friends' faces displayed a mix of shock and amusement. One asked if she had considered talking to me about it. My wife scoffed. "What's the point? He's clueless but reliable. I've accepted the trade-off, financial security for mediocre intimacy. Besides, I doubt he could improve anyway." I backed away silently, my chest tightening with each step. Retreating to my office, I closed the door and sat in stunned silence. The words replayed in my mind on a cruel loop. 10 years of marriage reduced to a transaction, my financial provision in exchange for her tolerance of me as a husband. That evening I maintained a facade of normalcy. We ate dinner, discussed mundane topics, and watched a show together. She had no idea that internally I was cataloging every interaction through a new lens. Had she always looked at me with that hint of disappointment? Was that subtle eye roll when I touched her shoulder always there? Or was I now hyper-aware of every micro-expression? Sleep evaded me that night. Beside me, she breathed peacefully, unaware that her husband now questioned every moment of their relationship. Morning came and I went through the motions of our routine, observing her with newfound clarity. The casual way she asked about my upcoming bonus while planning an expensive vacation, the dismissive tone when discussing my input on house renovations, the constant interruptions when I spoke at social gatherings. Over the next few days, I maintained the illusion that nothing had changed, while internally everything had. I noticed patterns I had previously dismissed, how she'd take subtle jabs at me in public framed as playful teasing, how she'd roll her eyes when sharing amusing stories about my habits to friends. Each observation added weight to my growing realization. I was not respected in my marriage. A week passed, and the initial shock transformed into something more potent: resolve. I realized I had 2 choices: confront her immediately in an emotional confrontation that would likely lead nowhere productive, or develop a strategic response that would address the fundamental imbalance in our relationship. I chose the latter. If I was valued merely as a provider, what would happen if that role disappeared? The thought didn't bring me joy, but it did bring clarity. That night, I opened my laptop and began researching financial advisors and employment lawyers. While she slept soundly next to me, I started making plans. The path forward was clear. I wouldn't confront her with anger. Instead, I would systematically reclaim my dignity through action. I would transform myself, not to win her approval, but to rebuild my self-respect. And most importantly, I would redefine my role as a provider on my own terms. The following week became an exercise in careful observation. I began paying attention to details I had previously overlooked. Each interaction now carried new significance. During a dinner party at our home, I noticed how she would touch my arm affectionately when discussing our recent vacation. Yet her eyes lacked warmth. When friends complimented my recent promotion, she quickly redirected the conversation to her own achievements. I decided to dig deeper. While she was at her weekly yoga class, I checked our shared tablet. My stomach dropped when I found months of text conversations with her friends. There it was in black and white, countless messages mocking my bedroom performance, jokes about my quirks, and, worst of all, discussions about how she had settled for stability rather than passion. One particular exchange from 3 months ago cut especially deep. Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like with someone more exciting, but then I check our investment portfolio and remember why I stay. That night, I lay awake contemplating my next move. Confrontation seemed pointless. Denials would follow, then tearful apologies that would change nothing fundamental about how she viewed me. Instead, I chose a different approach. If our relationship had indeed become transactional, I needed to reassess my side of the equation. The next morning, I called an old colleague who had been trying to recruit me for years. His company had been pursuing me relentlessly, offering substantially more money but requiring extensive travel, something I had always declined for the sake of my marriage. This time, I expressed interest in discussing possibilities. The conversation was promising. An interview was scheduled for the following week. At home, I maintained the appearance of normalcy while subtly creating distance. When she suggested a weekend getaway at an expensive resort, I politely declined, citing work commitments. Her momentary confusion quickly turned to irritation, a small but telling reaction. For perhaps the first time in our marriage, I had denied her something she wanted without offering an alternative. I began spending more time at the gym, channeling my hurt and anger into physical improvement. I updated my wardrobe without mentioning it, replacing the comfortable but uninspired clothes she had always selected with styles that better suited my preferences. Small changes, but they represented a shift in mindset, choices made for myself rather than to please her. 2 weeks after overhearing that devastating conversation, I noticed her studying me with puzzled interest. "You seem different lately," she remarked during dinner. "Is everything okay at work?" Her concern seemed genuine, but I recognized it for what it was, concern for our lifestyle, not for my well-being. "Everything's fine," I replied with a practiced smile, just focusing on some personal goals. The vague response satisfied her temporarily, but I caught her watching me more carefully in the days that followed. My interview went exceptionally well. The position offered not just higher compensation, but also an opportunity to work on projects I had always been passionate about. When the offer letter arrived in my email, I felt a strange mix of excitement and sadness. This change would have been cause for celebration in a healthy marriage. Instead, it represented the first concrete step toward my independence. I began consulting with a financial advisor, explaining my situation in carefully neutral terms. Together, we developed a strategy to disentangle some of our shared assets without raising immediate alarms. Nothing dishonest or secretive, merely a restructuring that would give me more flexibility in the future. At home, my wife began making more efforts to connect. She suggested we try a new restaurant, bought tickets to a concert I had mentioned wanting to see, even initiated intimacy one evening. The irony wasn't lost on me. Her increased attention coincided precisely with my emotional withdrawal. For years I had craved this kind of engagement from her. But now it felt hollow, motivated by her sensing something was off balance. One evening she arrived home with an expensive watch, a just-because gift that would have thrilled me months earlier. As she fastened it around my wrist, her fingers lingering on my pulse point, she asked what I thought about planning a vacation to celebrate our upcoming anniversary. The perfect opportunity to begin the next phase of my plan had presented itself. "Actually," I said, meeting her gaze directly, "I've been meaning to talk to you about some changes coming up at work. We should probably discuss those before making any major plans." The conversation that evening was carefully orchestrated. I shared just enough information about potential changes at work to plant seeds of uncertainty without revealing my actual plans. Her reaction was precisely what I expected. Immediate concern about how any career shift might impact our lifestyle. Thinly veiled as support for my professional growth. When I mentioned the possibility of more travel, her brow furrowed slightly before she composed her features into an expression of encouragement. "Well, whatever you decide, I'm sure it will be the right choice for us," she said, emphasizing the last word while placing her hand on mine. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but I noticed her checking her phone repeatedly, undoubtedly messaging her friends about this new development. Later that night, I caught her scrolling through our joint account balances, confirming my suspicions about her priorities. The following weeks became a masterclass in subtle preparation. I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer specializing in family law, ostensibly for estate planning purposes. During our consultation, I asked hypothetical questions about asset division and financial responsibilities that provided valuable information without committing to any action. Knowledge was power, and I was quietly accumulating as much as possible. At home, I continued my physical transformation. The hours at the gym were therapeutic, each rep and set rebuilding not just my body but my self-confidence. I changed my diet, prioritizing nutrition over convenience, preparing my own meals rather than relying on the takeout she preferred. My energy improved, my posture straightened, and occasionally I caught her watching me with a mixture of appreciation and uncertainty. My professional transition progressed smoothly. I accepted the new position but negotiated a start date 6 weeks out, giving me time to properly organize my departure from my current company. The role came with an impressive salary increase, stock options, and a signing bonus, none of which I mentioned at home. Instead, when discussing the new job, I emphasized the travel requirements and challenging schedule, setting expectations for significant changes to our routine. 3 weeks after that initial conversation, I received an email that accelerated my timeline. The company needed me to visit their headquarters for early onboarding and team meetings. The trip would require a week away, the longest we'd been apart in years. When I shared this information over dinner, I observed her reaction carefully. "A whole week? That seems excessive for orientation," she remarked, failing to hide her displeasure. "And will this be a regular occurrence?" "It's possible," I replied non-committally. "The role requires more hands-on involvement than my current position." She was quiet for a moment, calculating. "Well, I suppose I could use the time to plan a girls' trip. That resort in Palm Springs has been on our radar for months." I nodded agreeably, noting how quickly her focus shifted to how she could benefit from my absence. That evening, I overheard her on the phone, laughing with a friend about having freedom for a week while simultaneously complaining about potential lifestyle adjustments if my travel became regular. The business trip provided the perfect opportunity to advance my plans without scrutiny. Before leaving, I moved several important documents to a secure location and opened a new bank account at a different institution. Nothing dramatic or complete, just establishing the infrastructure for greater independence. The week away was transformative. Immersed in challenging work with colleagues who valued my expertise, I felt respected in ways I hadn't experienced at home in years. In the evenings, I explored the city alone, enjoying simple pleasures like reading at a cafe or watching the sunset from a park bench. Without the constant undercurrent of judgment, I rediscovered parts of myself that had been suppressed in my marriage. When I returned home, the contrast was jarring. She greeted me with unusual affection, presumably having missed the conveniences I provided rather than my companionship. The house was untidy, takeout containers piled in the trash, evidence that her self-sufficiency extended only to planning social outings, not maintaining our shared space. "I've been thinking," she said that evening, curled against me on the sofa in a way that once would have filled me with contentment. "Maybe we should plan that anniversary trip soon, before your new job gets too demanding. Somewhere special, just the two of us." Her fingers traced patterns on my chest as she outlined elaborate plans for a luxury vacation, estimating costs with casual entitlement to the funds I earned. In that moment, the disparity between what she valued and who I was had never been clearer. She wanted the provider, not the person. "Actually," I said calmly, gently removing her hand from my chest, "there's something important we need to discuss first." Her body tensed beside me, that practiced smile faltering slightly. "That sounds serious," she said, attempting to keep her tone light while her eyes betrayed mounting concern. "What is it?" "The new position is more significant than I initially explained," I began carefully. "It involves relocating to the East Coast headquarters for at least the first 6 months." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as various emotions crossed her face: surprise, confusion, and finally calculation. She sat up straighter, creating physical distance between us that mirrored the emotional gap I had been feeling for weeks. 6 months? That's practically a separation," she finally responded, her voice rising slightly. "Why would you even consider accepting those terms without discussing it with me first? We're supposed to make major decisions together." The irony of her sudden interest in partnership wasn't lost on me. For years, I had been the one accommodating her preferences, adjusting my schedule around her social calendar, supporting her desires with little reciprocation. Now that my choices affected her comfort, suddenly consultation was paramount. "The opportunity is exceptional," I replied evenly. "And it's not permanent, just the initial training period. After that, we can reassess." She studied my face, searching for the familiar signs of yielding, the pattern established over a decade where I would ultimately prioritize her wishes over my own. Finding none, her approach shifted tactically. "I understand ambition. Truly I do," she said, voice softening as she moved closer again, hand resting on my knee. "But we've built a life here. My job, our friends, the community, all of that matters too. Surely there's a compromise." The conversation continued late into the night, a complex dance of negotiation where each of her arguments centered ultimately on maintaining her standard of living and social standing. Not once did she ask about my motivations beyond career advancement or express genuine interest in my professional fulfillment. The pattern was clearer than ever. I was valuable primarily as a provider, not as a partner. When we finally went to bed, She curled against me in a physical reconciliation that resolved nothing. In the darkness, I felt her breathing eventually slow into sleep, while my mind remained active, mapping out the next steps in my quiet revolution. The following weeks brought subtle but significant changes. I began declining social invitations that held no interest for me, but that she insisted we attend. I adjusted my work schedule to accommodate my own preferences rather than her convenience. Small assertions of autonomy that were met with increasing frustration on her part. One evening, returning from the gym, I overheard her on the phone, her voice animated with irritation. "He's becoming impossible lately. Ever since this new job opportunity, it's like he's a different person. Less accommodating, more, independent. And now he's talking about moving across the country for months. Who does that without their spouse?" A pause as the person on the other end responded. "Of course I've tried talking to him, but he's unusually firm about this. I'm running out of ideas to make him see reason." Another pause. "No, absolutely not. Long distance is out of the question. Do you know what that would do to our standing in the community? Everyone would assume we're having problems." The truth of our situation, laid bare in her private conversation, confirmed everything. The appearance of our marriage mattered more than its substance. My usefulness as a husband was evaluated primarily through the stability and status I provided. The company expedited my relocation timeline, requesting I begin transition work within 3 weeks. When I shared this update, she implemented a full-court press of emotional manipulation, tears, reminiscing about our early days together, even suggesting couples therapy for the first time in our relationship. Each approach felt calculated, designed to re-establish control rather than reconnect authentically. I remained polite but resolute. The apartment I had secretly secured in the new city was confirmed. My financial arrangements were nearly complete. The pieces were falling into place while outwardly I maintained the appearance of a husband reluctantly pursuing a career opportunity despite his wife's reservations. 2 weeks before my scheduled departure, we attended a dinner party at the home of mutual friends. Throughout the evening, I noticed her watching me interact with others, perhaps seeing for the first time how I had changed, the confidence I now carried, the ease with which I engaged in conversations without seeking her approval, the attention I received from others. All of it visibly unsettled her. In the car on the way home, she broke the tense silence. "Everyone was asking about your new position. You seemed quite enthusiastic about the move." "It's an exciting opportunity," I replied simply. "And what exactly am I supposed to do while you're building this exciting new life across the country?" The question hung between us, heavy with implications. In that moment, I made a decision. The time for the gradual unveiling of my plan had passed. She deserved to know exactly where we stood before I left. "I think we should have an honest conversation about our marriage," I said as we pulled into our driveway. "Not about the job or the move, but about us. About what we truly want from each other and this relationship." Her expression shifted from irritation to weariness. "What does that mean?" "It means I know everything," I replied quietly, turning off the engine. "And tomorrow we're going to talk about what happens next." The color drained from her face as my words registered. "What are you talking about?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Her hands clutched her purse tightly, knuckles whitening with pressure. The confident woman who had manipulated our relationship for years suddenly looked vulnerable, caught off guard by my direct approach. "Let's continue this inside," I suggested calmly. The short walk from car to house felt interminable, the silence between us charged with unspoken revelations. Once inside, she immediately poured herself a generous glass of wine, a defensive mechanism I'd observed countless times before difficult conversations. "You said you know everything," she finally said, attempting to regain composure. "What exactly does that mean?" I took a deep breath. Maintaining the calm demeanor I had practiced for weeks, 6 weeks ago, I overheard your video call with your friends, the one where you described me as a great provider but terrible lover, where you mocked our intimacy and explained how you've tolerated me for financial security. Her eyes widened momentarily before narrowing defensively. "You were eavesdropping on a private conversation. I was coming to surprise you by helping with dinner." "The door was partially open," I replied evenly. "But that's hardly the point, is it? What matters is that I heard the truth, your truth about our marriage." She set down her glass with deliberate care. "It was just girl talk. You know how friends exaggerate for entertainment. You can't possibly be making life-altering decisions based on something so trivial." "It wasn't trivial to me," I said. "And it wasn't just that conversation. After hearing it, I started paying attention. I saw the patterns. How you speak about me to others. How you value what I provide rather than who I am. I checked our shared tablet and found months of similar conversations with your friends. Her expression hardened as she realized the extent of my knowledge. So you've been investigating me, planning some sort of revenge. Is that what this job and relocation is about? Punishing me for venting to friends? I shook my head slowly. This isn't about punishment. It's about clarity. For years I've compromised my needs and desires to maintain our lifestyle and keep you happy. I believed we were partners, but I've come to understand that for you this relationship has been primarily transactional. You've tolerated aspects of me you find disappointing in exchange for the security and status I provide. That's not fair, she protested, though her objection lacked conviction. Every marriage involves compromise and acceptance. You've benefited from this relationship too. I acknowledged. But the difference is in what we value. I wanted a genuine partnership with mutual respect. You wanted a provider who wouldn't challenge your autonomy or demand too much emotional investment. She was quiet for a long moment, her tactical mind visibly reassessing the situation. When she spoke again, her tone had softened considerably. We all say things we don't mean sometimes. If I've made you feel undervalued, I'm truly sorry, but throwing away 10 years over one thoughtless comment seems extreme. We can work through this. Her apology might have swayed me weeks earlier, before I had discovered my own worth apart from her validation. Now it felt like another manipulation, offered too late and with too little sincerity. The job opportunity is real, I explained, and I'm taking it. I'll be leaving as scheduled in 2 weeks. During that time, I'll be staying in the guest room. And after the 6 months? She asked, calculation evident in her eyes. I won't be coming back to this house, I replied simply. I've secured an apartment near the new office. My lawyer will contact you next week to begin discussing separation arrangements. The word lawyer hit her like a physical blow. Her carefully maintained composure cracked, tears welling in her eyes. Whether from genuine emotion or tactical advantage, I couldn't be certain anymore. You can't just decide this unilaterally, she insisted, voice rising. What about everything we've built together? The future we planned? That future was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of our relationship, I countered. I believed we were building something meaningful together. You saw me as a reliable resource, emotionally disappointing but financially useful. That's not true, she protested, tears now flowing freely. I love you. I've always loved you. For the first time in our conversation, I felt a flicker of genuine emotion break through my careful composure. Not anger or hurt, but something closer to pity. Perhaps you do, in your way, but not in the way I need to be loved. Not with respect or admiration or desire. She moved toward me then, reaching for my hand with practiced intimacy. We can fix this. Counseling, a fresh start, whatever it takes. Don't throw away everything over wounded pride. I gently withdrew my hand from hers. This isn't about pride. It's about self-respect and honesty. We want different things from marriage, and we always have. I'm just finally acknowledging that reality. The remainder of the evening passed in emotional extremes, her tactics shifting from tears to anger to bargaining and back again. I maintained my resolve, answering her questions honestly but refusing to be drawn into circular arguments or guilt-driven reconciliation. Eventually, exhaustion overtook emotion as she retreated to our bedroom alone. She turned at the doorway, face tear-stained but expression hardening into something closer to the calculating partner I had come to recognize. You'll regret this, she said quietly. When the excitement of your new job fades and you're alone in a strange city, you'll remember what you threw away. I met her gaze steadily. No, I replied with certainty born of weeks of careful reflection. I won't. The final 2 weeks in our shared home unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of avoidance and negotiation. She cycled through strategies with increasing desperation, affectionate gestures in the morning, cold silence by afternoon, tearful reconciliation attempts in the evening. I maintained polite but firm boundaries, sleeping in the guest room and focusing on practical preparations for my departure. 3 days before I was scheduled to leave, her approach shifted dramatically. I returned from a final meeting with my soon-to-be former colleagues to find her waiting in the living room, composed and businesslike, a stark contrast to her emotional displays of previous days. We need to discuss logistics, she announced as I set down my keys. If you're committed to this separation, there are practical matters to address. I nodded. appreciating the return to rationality despite suspecting this was yet another tactical approach. We sat at the dining table, the formal distance between us symbolic of our new reality. "My lawyer suggests we categorize and document all shared assets before you leave," she began, sliding a folder across the table. "He's prepared a preliminary list for your review." I opened the folder, scanning the meticulous inventory that heavily favored her interests. The comprehensive nature of the document confirmed my suspicion that she had been planning this conversation for days, perhaps consulting with friends about the most advantageous approach to separation. "I've already provided my lawyer with a similar inventory," I replied calmly. "They'll be in contact to reconcile any discrepancies." Her eyebrows raised slightly. She hadn't anticipated my level of preparation. "I see. And the house? I assume, given your concerns about our marriage, you won't contest my remaining here." "I have no intention of displacing you," I confirmed. "My lawyer will discuss fair compensation for my equity." The conversation continued in this vein, her probing for weaknesses in my resolve or preparation, finding none. As we concluded the discussion, a flash of genuine curiosity seemed to overcome her tactical considerations. "I don't understand," she said, her voice softer than it had been all evening. "You never showed any sign of dissatisfaction before. All these years you seemed content." "I was trying to make our marriage work," I answered honestly. "I believed that if I was supportive enough, accommodating enough, eventually we would develop the partnership I thought we both wanted. And now I understand that we had fundamentally different views of marriage. You wanted security and status. I wanted mutual respect and genuine connection." She was quiet for a moment, studying me with new awareness. "You've changed," she finally said. "It's not just the decision to leave. You're different, more confident, less pliable." "I've reclaimed parts of myself that I had compromised away," I acknowledged. "That process began the moment I heard how you truly saw me." The evening ended with a fragile truce, each of us retreating to separate spaces to contemplate the imminent dissolution of our shared life. My departure day arrived with surprising calm. My essential belongings had been shipped ahead to my new apartment. All that remained was a suitcase of clothes and personal items for the journey. As I brought my luggage downstairs, I found her waiting by the front door, expression unreadable. "So this is really happening," she said, watching me set down my bag. "It is," I confirmed simply. "Your lawyer contacted mine yesterday. The terms are more generous than expected." I nodded. Despite everything, I had no desire to punish her financially. My goal was freedom, not retribution. "Before you go," she said, stepping closer, "I need to understand something. Was there nothing I could have said or done these past weeks that would have changed your mind?" The question seemed genuine, perhaps the first truly authentic moment between us in months. I considered my response carefully. "The issue wasn't what you said after I discovered the truth," I explained gently. "It was the years of dismissal and disrespect that preceded it. Finding out I was valued primarily as a provider rather than a partner wasn't the beginning of our problems. It was the revelation of problems that had existed all along." She flinched slightly at my words but didn't contradict them. Instead, she asked the question that perhaps she had been avoiding, and if I had never made that comment, if you hadn't overheard that call, then I might have continued compromising myself indefinitely, I admitted. "In a strange way, I should thank you for being honest with your friends, even if you couldn't be honest with me. It allowed me to finally see the truth of our situation." A car horn sounded outside. My rideshare to the airport had arrived. I picked up my suitcase, suddenly aware that this was the final moment of our life together. 10 years of shared history culminating in this quiet goodbye in the entryway of what had once been our home. "I never meant to hurt you," she said softly as I opened the door. I turned to look at her one last time. "I believe that. I also believe you never really saw me, not completely. You saw the parts that were useful to you and tolerated the rest. I deserve more than tolerance, and so do you." The spring air felt fresh and promising as I walked down the front path toward my waiting car. Behind me lay a decade of compromises and unmet expectations. Ahead, the uncertainty and possibility of a life reclaimed. As the driver placed my suitcase in the trunk, I felt the weight of my wedding ring still in my pocket, removed weeks ago but carried as a reminder of lessons learned. I had entered my marriage believing that loving someone meant making them happy at any cost. I was leaving it with the understanding that true partnership requires mutual respect, honesty, and the courage to be authentically seen. The woman who had mocked me to her friends had inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible, the motivation to rediscover my worth beyond what I could provide to others. As the car pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back. There was no need. The road ahead held possibilities I was finally ready to explore, not as someone's provider, but entirely as myself.